Welcome to the latest edition of the Soccer Down Here, Women's Soccer Weekly, and it will be weekly going forward because my schedule is actually not as crazy coming up, thankfully. I get a chance to catch up and get into this Women's World Cup year because there's so much going on around it, and we have to talk about a lot of things today. We've got two guests. We have separately the Queens of the South, Jessica Charman, Kelly Frances from the Unrelegated podcast and the ATL UTD Fan TV network. We're going to start with Jess, and we're going to talk about the SheBelieves Cup. We're going to talk about the two teams that I think everybody's talking about coming out of this tournament, England, who won the tournament, and the United States, who maybe brought some questions to the fore about what their World Cup is going to look like this summer. And we'll also get into a few other things as we do. We'll also talk to Kelly about the lawsuit that was filed about everything related to the separate pay, unequal working conditions. All of that will be in the second half of the show. But we're going to start with Jess, and we're going to talk SheBelieves Cup. Jess, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. You know, just surviving the pollen. So if I sound a little bit manly, it's the weather that's impacting me today.
The pollen gets everybody. You are not alone in this battle. Hopefully it is a quick battle and it's over soon.
Absolutely. And I'll invest in some Allegra, if anything.
Allegra, Flonase, all the different things. Allegra and Flonase was my combination. It seems to help for at least a little bit.
Well, I'll definitely give that a go.
Yes, give it a shot. Let's get into the SheBelieves Cup, and let's start with the champions because they won the tournament. They deserve to be talked about first. Your squad, England, is this the first major, and I don't even know if we consider it a major trophy. I guess that we can start there. It's a big trophy in a World Cup year, I think, because of the field that they defeated to win the trophy. And I know the squad took it very seriously. But do you look at this as a big accomplishment for the English women's national team?
I think you're right, Jason. It's mostly about the timing that makes this an important trophy. Usually on non-World Cup years, you kind of look at it as a bit of a commercial, a money-making, and a way, honestly, of the USA women's team kind of showing off across the country, if that makes sense. They haven't always invited the strongest teams, and I know the US has been champions multiple occasions, but I think this year it meant something. Firstly, because of the competition, you had 4 of the top 10 ranked female teams in the world in Brazil, Japan, USA, and England. So that in itself means something when you win a trophy that has such high levels of competitors in it. And then obviously with the World Cup beginning in June, you know, it's early 2019, and what better way to go into a World Cup year than to show that you have competed, beaten, or been unbeaten. Obviously, they didn't beat the USA, but they have competed and held their own against 3 of what would have been some of the favorite teams going into the tournament. So I give it some importance because of the year. But as a whole, the SheBelieves tournament, it isn't obviously a major trophy. I would take a World Cup any day over a SheBelieves Cup, but it's obviously a nice way, and it's a good confidence mover for the women's team, the England women's team. And it was a great way to test out the competition. And I know that England even mentioned how they were going to play slightly different teams against teams that they might face in the World Cup because you don't want to give away all your tactics. So that was an interesting thing too.
Something that stood out about England's performance in the SheBelieves Cup was their ability to come back in matches. They were a second half team, and that's something we've associated with the United States team quite often. England is now taking that fight and that fighting spirit on. Do you feel like this is going to be a hallmark of this team going forward?
I hope so, because I think it's a very positive quality, particularly in tournament soccer, when you're playing games back to back to back. It's really important that you can hold out leads and push towards the end, because that's when both of the teams are getting tired. It's so important that you don't sort of close off in those last few minutes and make errors, because that's when a team is able to get back. And in tournament football, it can be one mistake in the 90th minute, and that's, you know, end of tournament for you. So I really enjoy that style of how we're playing. I think you have to praise the coach a lot for that, because at the end of the day, it has to be something to do with a halftime talk. I think Phil Neville, he has had some criticism, and I know we've talked about that in the past, but I think he's proving himself now to be a very good manager. What I found really interesting was it was announced how even in the Japanese game where England went 3-0 up within the first half, which again shows that they can sort of put that pressure on early doors, he actually was still mad at the team because he felt they weren't being professional or they weren't being focused enough. And he wasn't content, even though they were thrown at 3-0 up within 30 minutes. So I think that says a lot about a coach, that he's more than just results. He's more than just goals. He wants them to play the correct way. And he wanted them to take this tournament seriously in a way that it was preparing in the correct way for the World Cup. So Phil Neville has definitely grown on me completely, and it's a great work ethic and mentality that it seems the England women have to stay in games, to fight, and that definitely gives me confidence for the World Cup because, like I say, if you concede a goal, you can't give up. It's crazy that you would consider that, but it's easy to get downhearted. So I think knowing that they have the capability to come back is a fantastic quality. And like you say, it used to be known as a US sort of thing, but I would be very proud if England can continue that fight and spirit and that never give up and never say die attitude.
So how do you feel about Phil Neville at this point? He's been in the job for about 14 months now, and there was a lot of outcry when he got the job initially. Looks like he's growing into it.
Yeah, I mean, I think deserved outcry too. There was, for those that don't know, there was some big controversy about his statements towards women, which is, I mean, it was a brave decision by the FA to hire someone that had obviously such obvious sexism going on Twitter. And on Twitter, you know, a lot of the times when they bring up these sort of controversies, they happened when they were young. You see it a lot in the media where people are pinned to tweets that happened in 2001. Well, he was being criticized for tweets that happened in 2011. And I can't remember the exact wording, but he basically made comments about women and their position in the world and that they should probably be looking after the kids, not watching sports and stuff like that. He came out, he apologized. I've watched I don't know if you've watched Class of 92, Jason, a documentary. And I mean, watching him with his daughter has cerebral palsy, is a beautiful thing, and it shows that he does have that respect for women. I think that sometimes things are made out of context, but it was a strange decision for me. But nonetheless, it seems to have paid off. He is doing things right. England are getting results. They've seen some progress. I know he came out and apologized. So some things, I guess, you have to be patient with. And if England continue to do well, soccer's a results game, and sometimes these things get brushed under the rug. I hope he learned his lesson, and it seems that honestly, if we can take a positive out of it, perhaps Phil Neville is sort of the epitome of the typical male soccer fan that maybe is a little ignorant to the women's game, but once he spends some time with it, realizes that it has just as much credibility as the male game.
Who do you feel like the key players are that are going to lead England in this World Cup?
I may be a little bit biased, but I'll start with one of my former teammates. I actually played with Fran Kirby while she was at Reading, now part of Chelsea. And for someone so small, she's kind of got that messy ability with the low center of gravity. She's strong on the ball. She's fast. She's got an ace shot. She actually scored 3 goals, a hat trick this weekend against Liverpool. I think she's definitely one to watch. You cannot ignore captain Steph Houghton, USA. Definitely will remember that name. She was the one that scored the brilliant indirect free kick from the goalkeeper picking up the back pass. Lucy Bronze is an interesting one. I mean, in the media, she'd been called the best right back in the world, but she's actually been playing in midfield during the SheBelieves Cup. I'm not sure about that decision at the moment, but you know, you have to trust in the manager and see how that goes. And then Beth Mead, who was the one that scored the screamer against Brazil, she's a pretty strong player too. Interestingly, we are going to be missing 2 important players. I know that's a common theme coming up to tournament football, but Jordan Nobbs is going to be out missing another tournament, which is a disappointment. And then Izzy Christiansen, got injured against Japan, had ankle surgery this week. Apparently, there's a chance she'll be back. She was a strong part in the SheBelieves Cup, but we'll see about that. What is so nice, though, is that as I'm listing these players, it's, one of them's a defender, one of them's a midfielder, one of them's a forward. So I think a lot of the times when you have a team, sometimes you're strong as an attacking team or you're a strong defensive team. But what I like about England is it seems that we have quality all over the field, which is, what better thing can you say about a team coming up into a World Cup year?
How much has the Women's Super League impacted England's team?
Oh, I think a lot, because these girls are actually playing together now in a domestic league and we're getting a lot of teammates together. In the past, it used to be that female players were concentrated all over the world, whether they be in the US, whether they be in, Sweden or France. Now there's so many more homegrown players playing in their country. And I think that helps with the recruiting, obviously. We've obviously still got some players playing in France, playing in the US. But I definitely think having that professional level of soccer at home is a great thing, because we're able to play the style of soccer across the leagues that England wants to play. The professionalism is obviously key. Having 2 tiers of professional league, having women train every day like the men, allows them to stay at the same level as other countries that have professional teams. I think the US had an advantage for a very long time because of both the college leagues and the professional leagues. It used to be when the highest level of women's soccer would only train twice a week in England. Now it's training every day. When you compare it to the college leagues, US women have grown up playing soccer every single day, twice a day in college. So they kind of have that advantage, or they used to have that advantage in tournament play, where you're playing games week in, week out. I think that's one of the reasons, honestly, that a lot of foreigners get injured when they come play college soccer, because they're not used to the play on Sunday, play on Wednesday constantly. But having the Women's Super League is bridging that gap, which I think is really exciting. And we finally got women who are full-time professionals. I read an article, actually, and I think the average Women's Super League player now gets paid $35,000, which obviously compared to the men's game is nothing, but that's a great start, I think, for the women's game. And it's very exciting that England, I would say, is one of the leading countries in terms of professional women's soccer.
Yeah, I mean, what other leagues would compare to the Super League at this stage? I mean, you have the NWSL with 9. The Super League's bigger. There's more teams there, and you also have, a whole table of teams and leagues underneath it that the United States doesn't have. You have the French League, and at least there's a couple strong teams there, Lyon especially. Scandinavian leagues, you have the Australian League, but the Women's Super League has to be right there with everybody else at this stage.
And what's special with the Women's Super League, and we've talked about it, is the way it mirrors the men's system with the relegation and the promotion. And that is so important when you're trying to attract fans that are maybe only into male soccer at the moment, because they see the comparison between the two. And you can attract the fans of the male team. Manchester United fans are going to support Manchester United ladies. Reading FC fans are going to support Reading ladies, because there's the parallel between them. And I think that's really special. Yeah.
Well, and let's get into a club like Manchester United. So their Manchester United Women's FC started in May of 2018. They've jumped on board with us finally. Manchester City is throwing a ton of money into their women's club. How important is it, and this is such a different thing from what we've seen in the U.S. historically, although it's starting to happen now, how important is it for your heavyweight, big-time clubs to invest in the women's game in a big-time way?
Absolutely huge, because these are the teams that have money. So if anyone's got money to burn, you've got to think it's the big clubs. They've got players that are being paid more as an individual player than it would cost to run an entire women's team for a season. So if the big boys weren't buying in, how can anyone believe that it deserves that credibility? Manchester United was a bit of a sore topic in the women's game, because there are a lot of people that didn't like the fact that they kind of bought their way into the Super League.
How did that work?
I'm not 100% sure I think they bought in and they basically put in enough money that they ended up in Super League 2. Now,
Okay.
most people have to start at a lower tier of football and work their way up through several promotions. But Manchester United, who had been famously resistant of getting a female team, suddenly decided that women's soccer was kind of popular and cool and decided to pay money, which other teams can't afford to do. You've got small, hardworking teams like the Luton Ladies FC, Watford Ladies FC that don't quite have the same amount of money or financial capability that have to play in the Women's Premier League, which is below the Super League, which is a little bit confusing because of the names, but they're playing in the third and fourth tier because they don't have the finances and they have to work their way up through ability. Man United dropped some big dollars and got thrown right into the mix. I understand why people were annoyed, but I think I have to see the Man United backing as a bigger deal than that. It was just a really cool thing that finally maybe arguably the most famous team in the world in Man United, one of them, that finally they have a women's team that wears the same jerseys, that, has the same name. I think that is a bigger achievement despite the complaints about, money buying. Because at the end of the day, we would be silly to deny that money rules football in this world.
Right. And they're in second in the championship right now behind Tottenham. Looking at the roster for England, so many players from Manchester City. How
Absolutely.
important is that in your mind to the overall success of the program?
I like it. I think it's a really cool thing when players are playing week in, week out with each other. They've got that natural chemistry. I hope that it helps that certain players are able to slot in and play together. But Manchester City is a powerhouse. They're so successful in the Women's Super League that you can't blame Phil Neville for picking players from this league, from this team rather. I know there's a lot of other mixes. There's some Chelsea players, some Liverpool players. It's good that he's looking at other outlets, but you can't overrule talent, and chemistry is a huge thing. And it's hard to create chemistry in an international team if you don't have a core group of players that have learned to play with each other. So I think that might be something that really helps England, because they've got a group of players that it's not just that they meet every international break to play, but they play every single day together.
Yeah, and that squad has not lost this year yet. They're 12-0-5. But
not a
Arsenal,
bad record.
Yeah, not bad, but Arsenal's right there with them. Arsenal actually has 2 games in hand, and they're 2 points back. So It's good. The competition is very, very good, and it's going to push the game forward.
And that's what we can hope. That's all we can hope for a Women's World Cup, where the games are close, because there's no fun when someone runs away with a league. Just how in the past people have run away with the World Cup. It's been a guaranteed USA win, so to say. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't make good TV. It doesn't make good games. No one really wants to see a 7-0 clouting. They want to watch games that are close and well contended.
So before we move to that and get big picture on the World Cup, what is one thing that does worry you about England's chances to win this summer?
I think as a goalkeeper, I'm going to say that sometimes we look a little bit nervous playing it out the back. We have some good goalkeepers, but I think their distribution is a little bit weak sometimes. And in the SheBelieves Cup in particular, when we would play the ball back, it seemed like we were a little bit nervous, or we avoided playing the ball back. And this is something that people get caught out on a lot. And if you press high against England women, I think you'll have a good chance of pressing and winning the ball back. I also think we were a little bit at risk on the counter-attack at times. I think against England, we pushed a lot of bodies forward, but then that left us quite exposed. And when you're playing, I think we like to play a very forward style of play, and we like to build up quick. That can obviously leave you exposed to the back, and I think you've got to shut up shop a little bit at sometimes. But other than that, I mean, we only conceded 3 goals during the SheBelieves Cup, 3 in 3 games. So I guess that's 1 a game average. It's not terrible, but I think they would like to see, being able to shut up shop a little bit quicker.
Are you going to lose your mind if it's an England-France final?
Oh, I don't want to play France in the final. But that's another thing England has in their favor. I think their pathway is a lot easier than a team like the USA.
Yeah, absolutely. The US would be looking at France in a quarterfinal, I think.
And that on home turf for France, and I think it would actually be played Is it
I
in
think it's in
Paris?
Paris. Yes.
That's what I thought. Playing France in Paris, I think that the metaphor, the 12th man, I really think that will make a real difference for the France.
Oh, 100%. I worry about the U.S., and we'll get into that in a second. Let's talk about the World Cup as a whole, because it expanded in its last edition in 2015, and you had some of those score lines that you talked about. You know, you had some blowouts. You had some countries that haven't had women's programs as long, aren't as invested in them, and you saw some wide disparity. I think once you got down to the knockout rounds, you had some great matches, and it was a great tournament to watch. This time around, you have 4 countries who are making their Women's World Cup debut: Scotland, South Africa, Jamaica, Chile. Italy's back for the first time since 1999. Argentina's back for the first time since 2007. Are you worried about some of that disparity between a 53rd ranked Jamaican squad against one of the powerhouses?
Yes and no. I think a team like Jamaica, and watching them play, I think they're so excited about qualifying that maybe just like how in the men's game, sometimes you see those underdogs getting that extra kick and that boost. And oftentimes the big powerhouses take those for granted. They expect it to be a guaranteed win. And, you know, they underestimate, and suddenly it's a close game. If it's a blowout, it's a blowout. It's one of those things where I think it's going to be closer than it's ever been before. You're always at risk of the blowouts, as you see in the Men's World Cup. I hope that teams like Jamaica manage to hold their own, because no one wants to be looking like they've been embarrassed on an international stage. But I really do feel like the gap is closer. A team like Scotland, such a small nation, yet they've played some good games. They've got some great players. They've got a lot of players playing in the Women's Super League, for instance. And I think we'll be pleasantly surprised with how these smaller nations come to play. And like I say, as more players become professional and more players are training every single day, it closes that gap, because now there's more professional leagues for people to play in. There's more distribution of professional players across each international team.
Group C is going to be fun, with Italy back for the first time in a long time and Jamaica in for the first time ever. I mean, you look at Australia and Brazil, those should be the 2 that go through, but with third-place teams getting into a round of 16, the Jamaica-Italy match, which is the second one in that group, that could decide who moves on to a knockout round game. And that's a huge game for those 2 countries. Yeah.
I think I like the way it's set out that the third places get a chance, because those make the games between third and fourth mean something. There's a lot of times when it's so obvious who's going through, even by game 2, you can kind of tell who's going to go through, that the rest of the games don't really mean anything. But what better way to motivate Italy and Jamaica than by letting them know that they have a chance to go play in the last 16 of the World Cup, be one of the top 16 in the world now.
Group D, you have Scotland and Argentina who play on the last match day in the group, and that could be the one. You'll have an England-Scotland group match, which will be a lot of fun. That opens the tournament June 9th.
That's a rivalry.
Yeah, a little bit. You have Japan in that group too, and you'd expect, again, England, Japan go through as 1 and 2, but Scotland, Argentina will be fun.
Yeah, and even like the Japanese, yes, they've played well, but they've conceded a lot of goals. They're very good going forward. They're young. They make immature decisions sometimes. I think that shows on the field. You can tell they're technically very sound, but they're very small. They're petite females that against a physical team, I don't like to stereotype, but I'm sure the Scots will come out and they'll kick some lumps out of Japan. And I think that might put the Japanese players off a little bit.
So you talk about physical teams, and the United States has been that for it's really what it's been known for. I think you're starting to see more technique in the American women's game, but it's definitely not where Japan is, for example. And I wonder if it is even where some of the top European sides are. I think the U.S. got as friendly of a group draw as you could get, and the schedule is perfect. You get Thailand first, you get Chile, who's making their debut second, then you get Sweden, who is always a difficult one, and U.S.-Sweden's been a pretty good rivalry at the women's stage. In the SheBelieves Cup, I think the U.S. left a lot to be desired. They didn't lose, but they only won once, and they lost leads twice in their first 2 games.
Mm-hmm.
That's got to be concerning for Jill Ellis. I don't think the U.S. is in a good spot right now. What do you think?
I think mentally, it's a lot harder to go from being in a winning position to throwing away a lead than it is the reverse. So these players on this team must be impacted in some sort of way to know that they've continually gone from leading a game to throwing that lead away, and against nations, with no disrespect, that 4 years ago they'd have expected to beat. The Japanese, England, these were teams that US would have seen on their schedule and they'd have thought, okay, like it'll be a bit of a battle, but that's our game to win. And it has to concern you in tournament soccer, in must-win games, that they're not shutting these games out. They're getting a 1-0 lead and they're sort of sitting back on it and taking risk at conceding goals. I think the goalkeeper thing is a problem. I'm not sure how I feel about the goalkeepers. You've got Harris. I think she plays at Orlando Pride.
Right.
I didn't get to see her in person. I got to see Adriana Franch, and she looked too shaky to me. And it was her international debut. But if you don't have a good pool of goalkeepers, that's always going to make you vulnerable. And I'll say it, and it kind of hurts me to say it, but female goalkeepers has been considered one of the weaker parts of the female game. And I guess part of that is because most females aren't 6'2", so they don't have that sort of size. And for the US, I think the goalkeeping is a weak spot. And ever since Hope Solo, and I've talked about her plenty of times, yes, she had some issues off the field, but a lot of games were won because of Hope Solo, her confidence to come out for balls, the way she demanded the best from her defense. And I think the US missed that stability at the back because they always look like a threat going forward. When you've got Alex Morgan, when you've got Megan Rapinoe, you've got a lot of forward offensive threats, but they're always looking vulnerable to concede. And against strong forward playing teams, I think they're always looking at risk to concede goals. And that means you can never hold a 1-0 win. You can never try and hold 1-0 defensively when you've got that risk at the back. And I do worry about the US and conceding goals.
I mean, going back, honestly, to 96, you've had Brianna Scurry or Hope Solo as your
They've been
goalkeeper.
ever present. Yeah, you've had
two of the best
brilliant
ever.
keeper. Mm-hmm.
And now you don't have that. And I think the bigger thing that you don't have, and something that really stood out to me in the SheBelieves Cup, is when you're blowing leads like that, who's the leader? Who's going to grab this team by the back of the neck and say, we're not doing this. This is not going to happen today.
There's not that voice.
I don't know who that is right now.
No, I don't think they have the same leader that, for instance, England has in Steph Houghton. Or Horton, I should say. When you watch Steph Horton lead from the back, and when England conceded a goal, you saw her scream, or yell, I should say, at her back line and make sure they know, hey, this isn't good enough. And when the US drop, I think everyone's head drop, and they don't have that leader to hold them accountable. And whether it's Alex Morgan that needs to get a little bit meaner, because I think she has a lot of respect from her players, or you need a goalkeeper that steps up, because, as they say, the goalkeeper can see everything. And they're the one that concedes a goal. At the end of the day, it's them that gets past. So they need to start holding people accountable, say, hey, this isn't good enough. Let's go back and get them. And I truly believe, watching after the US concede a goal, that oftentimes their head drops. And then that's sort of it. When they concede, they're not feeling like they can get that goal back.
I feel like the leader for this team and the player who could be the figure of this World Cup, and it's not a typical leader because I don't think she is that person to yell at the teammates and change it up, but I think the one who can change it up with her play and really her swagger on the field is Tobin Heath. Mm-hmm. I feel like this could be Tobin Heath's World Cup.
Even though she comes across as a shy player, really, to me.
She does, but then when she lets loose and shows her technique, and I think she is as talented as any American player has ever been. Mm-hmm. she's the one who can change a game. And the goal against Brazil that, it comes back to her on a rebound, but this was after
but it was
70-yard run. Yeah. I mean, Tobin Heath is a player who, if the U.S. is going to get past a potential France quarterfinal, I don't think they do it unless Tobin Heath has the tournament of her life.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. And she's been playing really well. I think if you're a fan from the USA, she's been a bright spark in what was quite a dark SheBelieves Cup for them, honestly.
Yeah, the thing about Jill Ellis and the lineups that she chooses, they seem haphazard. And this is not new. This is at the last World Cup as well. I mean, it really wasn't until you had injuries and suspensions kind of force her hand a little bit to find a shape and a lineup that worked, and it all clicked. But it was late in the group stage. You know, you look back at the final, and I think everybody thinks the United States dominated 2015. It was rocky. It was rocky early on, and they didn't really look convincing until that last match. I don't think anything's changed. You know,
and I think
it's
you got away with it.
Position a lot. Yeah,
you got away with it in 2015 because potentially the rest of the field wasn't as strong. But
right.
you can't hope that things click in a final when you face France potentially in the quarterfinals.
Right.
If you haven't clicked by quarterfinal, you're out. France will not take any prisoners.
And go back to the Olympics. That was where the U.S. was knocked out by Sweden in the quarterfinal, a Swedish team that made Hope Solo lose her mind a little bit publicly, but a Sweden team that had a game plan and knew the U.S. team inside and out, obviously with Pia Sundhage, and you just defended and frustrated and knocked the U.S. out in the quarterfinals.
And parked a bus, I believe Hope Solo said.
Yeah.
Didn't play soccer.
Played as cowards.
But that's game. That's a game plan, and you have to come to see it. And who won? Sweden won, and maybe it was cowardly in her eyes, but at the end of the day, it's a game of tactics as well as a game on the field, and that may be something that the US has running against them because their games have that much more publicity and they're that much more easier to watch and cover. Potentially, they become a team that's a lot easier to find a game plan against.
So the U.S. has 5 more friendlies before the tournament opens. And again, I think the tournament schedule helps you out where you have a couple games. Your first 2, you can kind of ease into the tournament a little bit. But in these friendlies, really, it's the first one. It's Australia on April 4th. That is going to be a tough one. Beyond that, it's Belgium, it's South Africa, it's New Zealand, it's Mexico, all games that you should dominate. I really worry about this team between April 4 against Australia and June 20 against Sweden.
Because it's not good preparation, honestly.
No.
You don't want to play against. It's going to make you a little bit complacent.
France, Spain, and SheBelieves.
It doesn't make sense to me, that scheduling, because really, are you getting a test against some of those teams? And that's no disrespect to those nations. They're all growing. But they're nothing compared to playing Sweden or even Chile and Thailand. They're going to be tougher matches. And if you're going to play a team that is only giving you, 20% of a challenge, how can you really prepare aptly? And how can, Ellis see the way that the team can play against a tough opposition? That's not a good way to start picking your roster, because anyone can play a good game against a weaker opposition. So it's some strange scheduling to me.
Yeah, I'm a little worried about the preparation. We'll see if things click into place for the U.S. Let's talk a little bit about the SheBelieves Cup as a whole and what it is and what it can be and if it's even being used in the proper way. You were there, and you were at the matches in Nashville. What did you think of just the experience around the SheBelieves Cup?
I think one of the positives, I thought a good thing was the fact that there were a lot of families and, a lot of parents were bringing their sons. I thought that was cool. It wasn't just a bunch of parents with their young girls. It seemed like parents had realized, this is a reasonably priced way to go watch some international soccer. And there was a good, diverse group. What I was impressed with was, and we mentioned this before, it wasn't just families. There were groups of guys that were there that had just come with their mates. And to me, that was a positive because it showed how the audience that female soccer is attracting has diversified. But that said, there's been a whole lot of contention about the actual name of the tournament and the way it's branded. I mentioned to you earlier off air that Hope Solo made a tweet about how calling a tournament She Believes sort of reiterates all the issues that women oftentimes come against. And I can agree with that. The branding across the whole ground was stuff like she aspires, she dreams, she desires. All of these words aren't true action achievement words. They're more hopeful. And what's concerning is, are you sending out a message to young females that you can try to do this or that you can succeed in this? So I thought Hope Solo really raised an interesting point. And I'll be honest, I hadn't thought about it till I read that tweet. But then when I had read that tweet in context and then saw the branding, I thought that was a little off for me.
Yeah, we talked about it with the naming conventions of teams last time we chatted about this stuff. And it's something that you wouldn't have a men's tournament set up this way. You wouldn't do it. You had, back in the 90s, you had the US Cup. That's what it was called. It was the exact same format, just a round robin of 4 teams, invitational that the U.S. men's national team would put together, and it was the U.S. Cup. This is really pulling off of, the marketing around it, but also, I mean, the chant that went around both the men's and women's national teams in 2014 and 2015. And that's kind of weird for a tournament and a marketing campaign to be based off of.
Yeah, and we also talked about the whole thing with the names on the back of the jerseys at the Nashville games. It was a very confusing, honestly, it was a bit confusing for me to watch because I don't know so many of the US players by vision, and realizing that when they announced the fact they'd put their female role models on the back of their jerseys, I mean, I guess a cool concept for young girls that were watching to aspire to this. But how are you talking to a female soccer player and asking her, who's the woman that you most look up to in history? It's just a strange question that you wouldn't ask a men's team, and you definitely wouldn't end up putting different names on the back of the jerseys. These ladies that are international women's soccer players for USA, the World Cup champions right now, why is their name not enough on the back of the jersey to be inspirational?
Exactly. And that's the frustrating part about it, is these players need to be more well-known on their own. I mean, it's a great idea. Like, I get the concept, and it sounds great on paper. I don't think it comes off well, though, in reality. I just don't think it works.
It was just weird to me. Again, some of the people picked as well. Maybe if it was a female soccer player from history that inspired them, that kept it in lines with the game. But when you're looking at the back of someone's jersey and they've got Beyonce on the back or Mother Teresa, great women, powerful and successful and inspirational in their own right. But doesn't that just show that women's soccer isn't all that important? These are musical stars and philanthropic stars, but it just seems weird, a weird choice when we're finally getting to a stage where a women's soccer player could walk down the street and people might recognize her.
Yeah, it seemed to get mixed reactions too. A lot of people liked it. A lot of people were kind of like, I think the two of us, it's a little odd.
I like the question. I wouldn't mind if they'd done a post-game interview.
Yes.
Like a video reel, something on the video reel, like who's the person that inspires you? And maybe they print a jersey and they present it to that female if they're around, if it's someone that they could do that to. Maybe they meet someone that they have been inspired by. But to play an international game in a tournament that you're trying to promote as a competitive tournament, and to say that Alex Morgan shouldn't have her name on the back of her jersey, isn't Alex Morgan worthy of that? Isn't she inspirational enough? I'm sure plenty of young girls, and even not even young girls, plenty of females or even males see Alex Morgan as a quality player. So I think she deserved her name on the back of the jersey.
Yeah, it makes it a little bit second rate.
It's gimmicky. It's gimmicky again.
Yeah.
And I think that's the issue that we've got with women's soccer. I get that it's not making as much money as certain avenues, but do we really need to play all these gimmicks and ways of trying to spin off and promote it in a different way to the men's game? It works with the men's game, and I'm sure if you give it time and you do it correctly, it will work for the females game.
So speaking of gimmicky, the Australian national team kit, Nike unveiled, I think, 14 different kits for the Women's World Cup, and the Australian one sold out in just a couple of hours. It's
a pretty cool jersey.
It's pretty cool. I like it. I usually don't like kits like that, but this one works for me.
Again, cool concept, cool idea. I'll take it as a praise that they think that women's individually designed jerseys can be a selling point now. But I mean, it's a bit strange to me that they're trying to now package the men and women's game differently a little bit again. And I like the red women's England jersey. It's a nice jersey, but I don't see the problem with the women's team wearing the same jersey as the men's team, but with a different cut. It's
right.
Just a strange concept for me. Is it a marketing technique? Quite possibly. Is it trying to make more money off the female game? Again, it's a possibility. There's some cool jerseys. Maybe it draws some media attention to the game, and it's cool that Nike have come in and they're pushing more money into the female game, it seems like. But again, just a little bit of a strange thing to do, in my opinion. I mean, there's plenty of good jerseys out there already, and they've been wearing those jerseys in all the preseason friendlies and all the qualifiers. So I don't see why they couldn't have just stuck to the jersey they were wearing.
Yeah, it keeps things separate as well, where they're in two separate worlds almost. Mm-hmm. And I don't think you need to do that anymore. I think it can just be branded as good soccer and a good kit. And I would love to wear a Tobin Heath jersey because I think she's one of the most exciting players in the world to watch.
But it doesn't have to be a separate jersey.
No,
does it
doesn't.
You? No, it can be the U.S. jersey, and
just
maybe
the U.S. jersey, and put her name and number on the back. I would
maybe
wear that.
Some of it's to do with the stars. I know I've heard some strange comments about Brazil has 5 stars above their female jersey right now, which is an odd one. It's
yeah,
I mean,
absolutely,
way to pretend, but that is something I agree should be changed.
Sure.
Like the U.S. men's team's not going to walk around with stars on their jersey.
No,
that would be foolish. I think you have the different stars because obviously it's a different team. But in terms of the jersey, whether it needs to be packaged like that, I think they may be trying to make more money off the female game in a different way. And it's not working for me. I like some of the jerseys. I think on the surface, it's a cool idea. And it's nice that Nike thinks that women's soccer deserves some money invested in it. But again, when you dig deeper into some of these things, it's the same as the SheBelieves Cup. It's the same as the names, the same as the team names and the individual differences in the US. When you keep digging into these, you have to wonder how much of an equal level we're still on in the female and male game.
And that's the perfect segue. So we're going to leave it there. So Kelly has a lot of material to work with. And speaking about equality, there's going to be a lot to work with as we dig into the lawsuit that was filed on International Women's Day. Perfect timing, huh? We're going to get into that next. Jess, thanks for your time. Appreciate it. Let everybody know where they can follow you and all the stuff you're doing over at Soccer in the Streets.
Absolutely. You can find me on Twitter at Jessica ATLUTD. If you're interested in getting involved with Soccer in the Streets, we're actually currently recruiting players and fundraisers for some of our upcoming tournaments. We'd love to have you on board. Reach out at jessica@soccerstreets.org, or you can just send me a message on Twitter.
Welcome to part 2 of the SDH Women's Soccer Weekly podcast. You heard from Jessica Charman in the first half, one half of the Queens of the South. Here is part 2 with Kelly Frances. What's up, Kelly?
What's going on?
We got not as much of fun stuff to talk about, but
No, we don't. But I have ate a full hearty Waffle House breakfast. I am ready to get into this conversation.
okay, let's do this. Let's start with where we kind of left off. So we were talking about the SheBelieves Cup, and Jess broke down a lot of the performances on the field, and we started to get into just the way the event is marketed. And the SheBelieves Cup has become the women's version of the old U.S. Cup that the U.S. men's national team did in the 90s when they were trying to get more competitive games and get these opportunities for the men's team to have big games on U.S. soil in a tournament format. But it was something that we hit on at the end it was called the U.S. Cup. It was just a tournament, and it was presented as a tournament. This it's called the SheBelieves Cup. Jess talked about the aspirational marketing around it. And I want to get your thoughts first on what the U.S. women's national team did in their match against England, where they did not wear their own names on the back of their jerseys. They wore, legendary women who inspired them, and it was a wide collection of different people. What did you think of that idea?
I honestly thought it was a great idea because that's pulling back into the marketing about the whole SheBelieves things. It's this movement about showing empowered women and showing that women are strong enough to make a difference in this world, whether it's in sports, politics, healthcare. You had a wide range. I know my favorite one was the RBJ one, or RBG, sorry. But yeah, I thought that was a great move to sort of coincide with the marketing of the SheBelieves Cup. I'm not necessarily the biggest fan on the name of the tournament. I think that if we're going to really empower women, the name should consider a change. I completely am 100% behind the idea of marketing empowered women, but I think if we consistently put this SheBelieves in there, it is aspirational, and it is hoping and believing and saying that you can be whatever you want to be on the marketing scheme. But I think we're, as women in this nation, I think we should be at a point where we're saying we are instead of we believe we can. There's obviously years and years worth of women, obviously the women that they wore on the back of their jerseys for that game, who believed in and fought and made a difference. And so that is going along with the marketing. But I think, honestly, if we're going to try to push forward this narrative of not just believing anymore, but doing and being what we said we were going to be, that I think the name and the idea of the marketing should change. And I think, weirdly, having other women's names on the back of the jersey just sort of pushed that a little bit further into the spotlight.
Yeah, I thought it was strange, and I totally get the idea of that marketing plan. I felt like in some ways, though, while it celebrated people who 100% should be celebrated, I felt like it kind of diminished the players on the field who need their own names marketed better, and that leads us to the lawsuit, which is a very tricky situation all the way around. U.S. Soccer Federation, what we had heard up until, I guess, from the last time we had issues with the CBA, the collective bargaining agreement with the women's national team and the federation, once that was resolved, all of the talk was that the relationship was good, it was getting better, things were progressing, and then out of the blue, you get a lawsuit filed. And marketing specifically is a big part of this, because one of the major quotes that has been circulated from the case is the head of Soccer United Marketing, who is the marketing arm for U.S. Soccer and MLS, quote, acknowledged that the women's national team has been under-marketed. She further acknowledged that the U.S. Soccer Federation has taken the women's national team for granted and agreed that there was a need for the USSF to invest equally in the women's national team and men's national team. At the heart of it, I don't think there's really anything you can argue, can you?
No, there isn't. I can see that on my own timeline. Just from my perspective as a consumer, I follow both the women's national team and the men's national team on almost all social media platforms. And consistently, when I'm going and scrolling through my Instagram or scrolling through my Twitter, the constant imagery and news updates and marketing for things with the men's national team far outseeds, there's a lot more of it than you would ever see for the women's national team. And this is even going into when the women were playing in the SheBelieves Cup. I saw a little bit of marketing for that on Instagram, things like that, or in news in general, but there really wasn't any movement or press towards it, even from somebody like me, a consumer that follows the team. I think the idea to market less is one of the biggest issues that people get into when you're having a discussion about revenue and why women shouldn't get paid more because they're marketed, why they shouldn't get paid more because they don't pull enough people into the stands. But pulling people into the stands goes right back to marketing. It's this whole idea, like with the film industry. If a film isn't promoted effectively, you're not going to have anybody in the theaters to watch that film. There is this whole idea about buzz and word of mouth, but that's impossibly hard to do when you're coming and talking about a sporting event that only lasts a day. Like, you only have a game for a day, and you can't have a word of mouth on a game that's already perspired, you know? So when you're coming into a tournament for something like a sports tournament where the people watching and the viewership is incredibly important for a specific time, a specific day that can't be repeated, the marketing has got to be there. And like I said, from a consumer who follows both the men's national team and the women's national team, the women's national team is completely undermarketed. And I can see that from a consumer standpoint, just within the social feeds that I'm getting.
So the case is based off the Equal Pay Act of 1963, and let's set a couple expectations, because this is a situation that's getting a lot of people fired up, and it should. But there's a few things that I think are just obvious about this. The Equal Pay Act of 1963 prohibits an employer from discriminating by paying different wages to employees on the basis of sex for work that is similar and requires the same level of skill, effort, or responsibility, and is performed under similar working conditions. That's pretty much the men's and women's national teams are essentially the same. I think Correct. In the United States, they are essentially the same. In other countries where you talk about responsibility, maybe there's wiggle room there. We're not getting into that. We're talking about the United States, where the TV rating, the biggest TV rating for a soccer game involving a U.S. national team, is the women's game from 2015 World Cup final.
Yep.
So the audience is there. Is there the same level of press coverage? Maybe not, but it's not that far off. It's not that wide of a disparity, in my opinion. Same level of skill, effort, similar working conditions, all that. The working conditions is one part of it, and this is something that has started to be addressed a little bit, and this is something that probably needs a little more investigation, because there's some information from Hope Solo filed a case before this and pointed some different things out that reportedly have been addressed in that CBA that was agreed upon after the Hope Solo case, but before this. Things like artificial turf.
Right.
No excuse for the women to play on artificial turf in the same venue where the men have grass brought in.
Correct. Right. So that was one of the things that was pointed out, and I've done a lot of reading on this just because it sort of seemed completely ridiculous for me for this to not be a thing, but
there's no justification for that.
Oh, no. Yeah, no. So 2014 through 2017, the women played on 13 home matches on artificial turf, which is basically 21% of their games, right? So during that time, the men played on no fields with artificial turf. So there was continual placement of women on artificial turf without the nullification or the idea of putting down grass, right? But anytime men played at a complex that had artificial turf, it was automatically brought in. I think it was cited that there was at least one case in which the women got grass, but that's one out of all of the games that they play.
Yeah.
So the fact that the disparity in numbers is so, I mean, this is something that's, when we talk further about multiple sections of this lawsuit, the idea and the numbers are just so drastic coming from the men's to the women's that you're almost stunned. like you read this and you're like, there's no way that this can't be seen and people not agree that this is something that should change. When you pay 21% of your home matches on artificial turf, but the men play 0, that's a disparity of number, obviously.
100%.
And
100%. And the men playing 1 game in Chattanooga since, and the women have not played on turf since October 2017. Okay,
right.
Maybe people realize that this looks really bad. We should probably fix it. It doesn't make it right, and this is a suit that is going back. It is a suit that goes back to, I believe it's from 2014 to 2018. So this is something U.S. Soccer really can't defend.
No, and I don't know if it's 2014, but I do know that it what I've been seeing is it started 4 days before the first game was played in 2015.
There you go.
So
okay.
This includes the 2015 World Cup squad. So basically they opened it up and they had 28 of the players sign, and then they left it open for anybody else to read the lawsuit and put their name on it.
Right.
And that goes back to any woman who was part of that 2015 squad and on.
And I mean, there's other things too. So the basic conditions, it's obvious that it has not been equal, and it was not equal during this period of time. I would hope that the CBA that was recently negotiated addressed a lot of that, and one that reportedly it has is per diem. Per diem was different in the CBA that the U.S. were operating under before the new one was finalized. They had a clause in it that they would be paid the same per diem as the men. The men's CBA then was renegotiated after that because it's completely separate, which makes this even more complicated. But the men's CBA was updated after the women's one went into effect, and they got a higher per diem. And for whatever reason, U.S. Soccer either oops, my bad, and didn't update the women's one, or it was intentional and they weren't paid the same per diem. Nobody can sit out there and argue that the per diem should be different.
Correct. And that's not something that's an oops thing, in my opinion.
I don't think
you are the U.S. Soccer Federation. You should be very well aware what your per diem is to your women's national team and to your men's national team. And the fact that the men's national team per diem was negotiated after the women's is not an oops factor. You knew exactly what you were giving the women, and the men probably asked for more, which is not shocking. But for you to not go back and go to the women to the women's national team and say, we've upped the men's national team per diem, we will also up yours, is not an oops thing. It's an intentional thing, 100%.
Yeah, if it is an oops thing, once that is immediately recognized, you're paying back pay. Like, that's just, there's no way around it. You're immediately fixing it, and it doesn't seem like that was the case. One thing to keep in mind, and I think this is something that gets people really confused about all this, you have different cycles. So the Women's World Cup is a year after the men. Mm-hmm. And when you look at the revenue in a Women's World Cup year versus that same year for the men, it's going to be different because of the way things are structured. For example, the Victory Tour. And 2015 was a huge year for the women's program, and it was a huge year for U.S. Soccer. It was not for the men because it was a Gold Cup year. It wasn't a World Cup qualifying year. It was a pretty slow year on the men's side. So you're going to get those disparities, and that's a red herring to me. I think so many people are yelling either on both sides of it about year to year. The year is different in the cycle because the cycles are lined up differently. So it's more about the full 4-year cycle to me.
Right. No, it should be. You're dealing in cycles of for the World Cup. So so you're the money and the pay and the revenue should all be based, I agree completely, on it being in that 4-year cycle, because at the end of the day, the goal for each national team is to win the World Cup. I mean, the Olympics are one thing, but really honestly the goal, the medal you want hanging on your neck is the gold from the World Cup. So 100% the revenue and the streams and all that stuff should be gauged in a 4-year span. And I think that it's appropriate then that the women's the lawsuit was filed in a 4-year span, and they from 2015 to now, that they have the data within that 4-year span. to set their case, which they obviously have a case here.
Yeah. And they need to compare the men's cycle. So if it's the start of the 2015 World Cup to now, then it would be the men's start of the 2014 World Cup.
Correct.
To
2018.
The end of 18. Compare those two even up, and I think you'll get a better sense of it. And in this one, it's the women have earned, if not just as much, they've earned more. And that's
for
you
sure.
Can't really argue it.
No, you can't. And there's an interview that was done with a bunch of the women who all were sitting together, and they were talking about the lawsuit. I think it was with MSNBC. I might have retweeted it, and I can retweet it again. But basically, the interviewer asked Carly Lloyd if she thought she should get paid more than the men, and she said absolutely. And the interviewer was like, "Really? Why? Why do you think that?" And she's like, "Well, we've won the World Cup. We are the number one ranking women's team in the world. We should get paid more. We are winners." And she's 100% right. We can go into discussion, and I have gone into discussion with a lot of people on Twitter about differences in women and men and competition level, and it's all just
all that's nonsense
rabbit holes. But basically, in the end, the women are World Cup winners. They just are, and they have been ranked first. They're first ranked at 10 out of 11 years. So there is no fight that you can say that they aren't pure quality winners, and they should get paid more.
There's a couple things that complicate it to me in that regard, and it's on both sides. One is the bonus structure is different because of the FIFA money coming in, and there is more FIFA money out of the men's World Cup than the women's. That's there.
Oh, for sure.
And that's something that if it's a bonus being brought in and it's strictly tied to revenue, okay, that World Cup bonus is going to be different because of that. I think base levels of pay, though, there's no difference.
No, base levels of pay, there should be no difference. But I agree. Like the disparity, and this is a FIFA problem and should also be addressed. But the disparity in the men's World Cup winner at 35, I think it was like 35 million for Germany. Not Germany, sorry. Was it Germany?
For 2018?
I can't remember. No,
or
not
was it 2014? 2014 Germany, yes.
Yes. So when Germany won in 2014, they got paid 35 million. Basically. And then the women, when they won, I think it was about 2 million. So the disparity there from FIFA is just a little ridiculous. So that's another issue that should be addressed at some point in time.
It has to be tighter. I mean,
for sure.
There is a big difference, and even just a sheer volume. I mean, there's a difference between a 32-team men's World Cup and a 24-team women's World Cup. Just in sheer volume there, you have it. The sponsors, there is a difference. I'm okay, and I think recognizing that and talking about it is completely okay. And that doesn't mean it should be that big of a gap, though. That's wrong. If there is so much more money coming in on the men's World Cup, okay, there maybe is a slight difference. Cool. I can live with that. But that's way too big of a gap. There's just no reason for that.
No, and I would want to see, honestly, the viewership numbers on this, because a World Cup is going to generate and draw eyes in general. And even especially now going into the World Cup for this year, when there are more teams who have qualified and the women's program and those nations are getting bigger, you're going to have more viewership for the Women's World Cup. So,
sure.
That in that case, the viewership and the sponsor money is going to go up. And I do agree that the men's World Cup draws more eyeballs and more sponsors and things like that. So I understand that that's how high the pay is, but the difference in pay is just astronomical. And I just don't see how a women's World Cup could if you're winning that, you can only win 2 million. It makes no sense. It just doesn't. It doesn't make any sense. Where are the numbers and why?
It's way too big of a gap. It's just way too big of a gap. I mean, I'm okay with a gap on that. If it is tied to revenue that FIFA is then dispersing in a bonus, and then that is being dispersed to players, okay, follow the numbers, follow the paper trail, prove it to me. Okay, cool. I can That I can get that. I understand that. But things like this, and this is something from the lawsuit that is just completely insane to me. The women receive a bonus of $1,350 per win against international opponents, period, against anybody. If it's against Honduras, who's ranked probably 70 or 80 in the world on the women's side, or it's against Germany, who's number 2. $1,350. On the men's side, if they beat a top 10 opponent, or Mexico, let's take Mexico. Let's not even get into a ranking. Mexico, they beat Mexico. $17,000 is the player bonus. That's
God.
ludicrous. I mean, that's just ludicrous.
I hadn't even seen that number yet, Jason. So thank you for now making me even angrier.
You want me to make you angrier because there's more that are just there's no explanation.
No, like I've done so much reading on this lately, and I keep running into new figures and new data that like is just there's so much here that hasn't been. I mean, it's been out there, but honestly, the lawsuit more so is just to bring eyes and attention to the matter, and that these women have been stating this case for years, and now this is a reason for them to be taken seriously. But please keep going on your numbers, because if people are listening and they don't think that that's just absurd and completely ridiculous and unfair, then there's no hope. You know,
I can sit down and get into a debate about what percentage of revenues should come in and the differences, and you need to invest more on one side because, as the head of Soccer United marketing said, it's been undermarketed and they need to invest more in it. Okay, if there's less revenue coming in, you might have to cut a larger percentage to the women's side to start to make up for these disparities. But things like this, bonuses per ticket sold. The men take $1.50 per ticket sold. The women take $1.20. Why? Individual sponsor appearance fees. The men make $3,750 for an individual sponsor appearance. The women make $3,000. Why? Marketing deal set up for the entire team. When the federation makes the deal, very common in any kind of deal like this, the federation takes 45% of the deal. It's a pretty big agent fee, but okay, whatever. The women, they take 50%. Why? There's no justification for that stuff. You can argue with me all day, and people will, about more people watch the men, there's more money brought in for the men. All that's fine. These are basics, and these are not anything about more tickets being sold. This is an amount per ticket that is a 30-cent difference for no reason. It's nothing about more individual sponsor appearances being booked. It's about the per appearance. There's a $750 difference. There's no justification. The same group licensing deal, the same team sponsorship deal. So if it's whatever, Johnson & Johnson comes in and wants to do something with the team and do a poster with the team, and it goes out everywhere, and the team's going to get paid a certain amount. The federation takes 45% of the men's deal, 50% of the women's deal. In volume, sure, you can have an argument and you can try to break things down and show that to me. These are not volume. These are individual aspects of it that there is zero justification for the difference.
Everything you said. And I'm just sitting here thinking about accountants that now have to go back and forth on percentage and things like that, when
it'd be a lot easier if it's the same.
A lot easier if it's just the same. I mean, thinking through all of this, I'm part of SAG, so I'm part of the Screen Actors Guild. And when you are talking about just working actors in general, there's a set rate for certain things, and they don't vary on men or women. Because in the end, we're all performers. I know this is sort of just a jump, but it keeps everything simple and easily structured. And if it's basic things like a wardrobe fitting or blah, 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 they're all set rates, no matter the gender, between man or woman. And I think for basics, it should be the same. Having a disparity or having a difference on price for something like an appearance makes no sense. Having a difference on price for a ticket sold makes no sense. it should just be 150 in general. Just make it simple and just equal pay, and that it just, yeah. The judgments and the decisions from the federation to do things like this just is mind-boggling.
Yeah, it's just not with a modern situation at all. There's just nothing around it, because the women's program compared to the men's program requires or it should, and I don't, these are a couple of things I don't know. I mean, one to me that's been a glaring issue is the fact that the women are in a World Cup year. The men hired their general manager first, and I think the women's general manager for the national team, and it's a new role and you're rolling it out and all that, but you hired the men first. You didn't hire the women's one, even though you're in a World Cup year now. I think they're in the search section of it. I think they're interviewing people maybe, or maybe finishing a list. I don't know, but that's, again, that looks really bad.
It does. I mean, it's just showing who you take as higher priority. It just is. And I mean, that's not shocking for anybody that's watched the U.S. national teams. It's very clear and obvious that the women's national team is not a higher priority, even though they are the one that wins more. They are the one that's ranked higher. They are the ones that at times do draw more revenue. I mean, honestly, you are looking at the 4-year span, but let's be honest. They're the reigning World Cup champions, and they're still a lesser priority than the men who didn't even make the World Cup this past cycle.
Yeah, it's difficult to justify. The people will yell about the bonuses, and I think that is such a nothing in this right now. The bonuses are not the big issue. It is the day-to-day. It is if the women go play a match in the United States, a friendly, they are not going to be able to make as much money as the men playing a similar match in the United States. Don't compare a World Cup qualifier to a friendly. Don't compare a World Cup game to a friendly. Compare like for like. And that's where the Federation has no ground to stand on, in my opinion.
Right. And I mean, that goes back to the numbers that have been circulated, where it's, on the lawsuit, it's stating that in a 20-game schedule of friendlies, the U.S. women's national team players could only earn a maximum instead of 20 games, and they can only earn a maximum. That means it's cap of $99,000, in which, per player, which averages out to about $5,000 per game. And the men, they earn an average of 263,000 and then some change. And then that basically, you're not only doubling, but you're tripling what they get paid per game. Why? If you're playing 20 friendlies and the men are getting paid $13,000 a game and the women are only getting paid $5,000 a game, that there is no justification for that difference of pay.
No,
there really isn't.
There's none. And when you add in the rankings and those types of things, it makes it even worse. But even if they were the 10th or 20th or 30th ranked team, there's no justification for it. And that's the huge problem here. Now, the one thing that complicates it, and I've seen some people try to throw this in and again, try to, I think, muddy the waters. And look, I get it. That's what some people want to do. That's the way they present things. But this is a topic that does need to be discussed. The U.S. Soccer Federation is involved in subsidizing the NWSL, and they pay the salaries for national team players who play in that league. Now, that is different than you have on the men's side, because you don't have national team players on the men's side drawing a salary. You did years and years and years ago before MLS started, and that was a completely different time. It's not really even justifiable to compare now. So if you are, let's take a player here locally. If you're Darlington Nagbe, you're paid by Atlanta United, flat out. When you participate with the men's national team, you get that bonus per ticket sold, that bonus per individual marketing appearance, all that type of stuff. You get your per game check, you get your per diem check, you get your bonus that you would get for the game. You get paid for doing the job that day. the women get that as well. But now you have national team players who are drawing a salary. And that was something that was fought for by the national team because the women's club game doesn't generate the same revenues. And there are not the same monies there to pay. And this was a way to get this league off the ground and support it and help it grow. And it's the longest-running women's professional soccer league we've had in this country. That will be thrown out by a lot of people, and it will be thrown out by the federation to say this is why some of these things are different.
Yeah, but that still doesn't make any sense, though. I understand that it's cool. People, it's the same employer, or that we're pushing you up and helping you, and no, because you're doing two different jobs,
right?
So you can look at it as a contractor basis. You're a contractor for your club team, and then you're a contractor for the U.S. Women's National Team. Those are two different jobs, and just because you work one on the other, you shouldn't be penalized for working another job. They're two different jobs.
I agree. It's something the federation will say as to, well, we didn't pay them as much in this role because we pay them for this role over here.
But isn't that punishing the employer then? Or punishing the employee?
It's complicated. It's a very complicated situation because, and I think there's a few other things that are a little separate with the CBAs, and that's probably going to take a lot of lawyers to explain to us. But this is the big picture one. And for me, I look at it as the federation and the women's national team program is benefiting from the league being subsidized. I think that's clear. And now I think they should benefit a little bit more because I think they should look at widening the player pool and bringing in players who are performing in the NWSL who maybe weren't part of the pool before. But that's a whole different conversation.
That is a whole different conversation for sure.
But the league helps these players who would not have a place to play in the United States and would be going overseas to play and would not be available to play so many friendlies and victory tours or SheBelieves Cup or whatever you want to do that the federation's making money on. So I do think it's a talking point, and I do think it's something that should be wrapped into the discussion. But I think it's important as it's overblown, and I hate when I see some people say that, well, if the federation just said, okay, we're going to pay you equally the same way, all the same percentages, but we're not going to pay you salaries for the league and the league's going to have to stand on its own, I don't think that helps anybody either.
It doesn't. It doesn't. But the federation, the federation offered to lift up and support this league, but you're then in back turn not supporting the women for doing their work for the women's national team. Yep. How does that make sense?
It doesn't. It just doesn't. It doesn't. It's something that, to me, it's two separate business decisions by the federation.
It is.
And if they feel like, now then this would create a different outcry that would, I think, again, have to be discussed fairly. If the federation made a decision and said, you know what, we've invested in this league, it's at 9 teams, it's not growing, there's the Sky Blue situation, which is a mess and needs to get fixed. It is what it is. It's not making any money. We're not going to continue to put money into it. And then the league has to solve it on itself. If the federation made that business decision based on revenues and expenditures and all that, okay, fine. That's a decision they're going to have to make because they're investing in it. But that, because you've chosen to invest in something, in my mind, although it is something that should be discussed and it does come up in these conversations, and it should, because the players are getting paid separately from the federation for something else, that doesn't justify the things we talked about basic levels of equality.
Right, and it's almost like this mob mentality. I do a favor for you, and so I can pay you whatever I want to pay you.
Mm-hmm.
That, come on. Really? They just,
Yeah.
yeah. And it sucks because we obviously do need the leagues and the clubs, and you want to be able to keep the women here and not have them go overseas, and you want to try and grow the league, but saying I'm going to lift you up, but then also holding them back at the same time is just, it's counterintuitive. And
Right.
it is very much like a mob mentality. My God.
Look, we weren't in the room, and if it was brought up during the last CBA, and look, if I'm the federation and I'm in a negotiation about salary and all that, okay, yeah, I'm going to say it. I'm going to say, look, I'm giving you money over here. I'm paying you. I'm supporting this league. Work with me on what you're asking for over here. And maybe there's some trade-offs. We don't know if that happened. And we haven't heard about that being the case. We haven't had any information come out from either side that, yes, it's less money here, the bonus is less, or the amount in the revenue on a marketing deal is less because that difference subsidizes our support of the NWSL. If they can prove that and prove that it was negotiated that way and it was understood that way, different conversation altogether. But that has never been the case. So while I really am happy that the Federation stepped up and helped get the NWSL off the ground and has supported it and found a way to pay the players a salary to play, because they wouldn't get that from the national team either way. They get that salary, they can play, it grows the league. All that's good. It can't be used as a straight-up justification for paying them less for national team duties that are the exact same as the men. I don't think that's valid.
It's not, and I'm actually literally doing calculations right now to say how ridiculous this is. So basically, you're saying, okay, because then you need to start looking at the actual salaries of the women who play on the in the league, right? Mm-hmm. So based on their yearly salary, just outside of the 20-game friendly numbers that we stated alone, that's a difference in pay of $164,000. So just that one bit alone about the 20-game friendly, you're basically not giving the whole women's national team $164,000. So if we're going to do per game, that's not even per game. That's per player. Oh my gosh. So yeah, $164,000 is the difference between a men's player, and that's on average a men's player. There are obviously men who make more, and there might be some men who make less, but on average, you're looking at $164,000 gap in pay for those 20 friendlies.
And that's not made up in that salary with the NWSL. It's
not.
It's just not. And that's the part.
No
I'm glad you broke that down, because that's the part that, if you're looking at it from the outside and you're looking at headlines and not getting into the depth of it, and you see this, you're upset because there's a lawsuit in a World Cup year. All right, but this is why it has been done this way, because there is no justification for some of these just very basic things.
No, 100%. And it's like, that's when you have to get down into the numbers. What this is the issue of whenever you're having this argument on social media or around people who don't want to, and it's happened so many times. I'll get into arguments with people on Twitter who are trying to justify a point that isn't completely invalid. And I'm arguing my case and I'm giving them articles to read to try to prove the point. And they're like, I don't need to read that. My justification is valid. And the only reason that anybody can educate themselves on this matter and see that there really is an issue here is by reading and looking at the numbers and breaking down the numbers like we've been doing this entire time. The numbers don't lie. And I'm going to say this because I love math, but the numbers don't lie, and the math is there. And math is fact. There's just no getting around the percentages that are not equal, the pay that is not equal, and there's obviously documentation, and there's all this information that's in this lawsuit that you can't get around. No. It's written in red ink. So
it's right there. I mean, a win not even getting into all the other just basics of the per ticket and percentage here and percentage there. A win against Mexico in a friendly for the U.S. men's team nets a player $17,000, or nets the team gets a bonus of $17,000. Okay. If the U.S. women beat Canada, which is their big CONCACAF rival, if they beat Canada in a friendly, it's $1,350. You cannot sit here and argue with me on that. Now, if you say,
and that's not 13,500, that's
right.
1,350. Yeah. That's what people need to realize.
If the men make
numbers
more,
again.
Yeah, there you go. See, and if the men make more at game, okay, we'll take a U.S. 1-0 win over Mexico in a friendly in Los Angeles that draws 80,000 people. Okay, would a U.S.-Canada women's game draw 80,000 people? Probably not in a friendly. That's fine. Let's say it's in one of the soccer-specific stadiums that seats 25. I think that's a packed-out 25,000. Cool. Say it's in Nashville.
Down in Orlando or something.
Yeah. Let's say it draws 30. Okay. So when you get into that per-ticket sold part, there's going to be a difference there. That's completely fine because you're dealing with a bigger crowd for a friendly game. Okay, cool. That doesn't justify the difference in the bonus for a friendly game.
No,
now, if you want to compare
a difference of $15,000. Yeah.
Right. If you want to compare a qualifier versus a friendly, cool. You're creating an argument that is not equal. If you want to compare a World Cup game versus a friendly, fine. They're not equal. I'm talking about like for like, U.S.-Mexico on the men's side, U.S.-Canada on the women's side. Your basics should be the same. And if because there's more people in the building and the men get a larger per ticket sold, because then it's about revenue coming in and it's tied to revenue coming in. The men make more money from that game. I think everybody understands that because they're getting it because of that per ticket sold bonus, not anything else. They shouldn't get it for the result. The result should be the exact same. There's no justification there.
No. And this also goes down to this. I mean, it's basically we're doing a circle. This goes back to marketing. And not even marketing, this also goes back to TV deals, because you've got to have sports channels who are willing to make the games front and central. I mean, anytime you have a big game like that, like U.S. versus Mexico, it's going to be on an ESPN or a major broadcast channel. And you've got to treat the women the same as well, because there are people who will view and turn in if it's marketed appropriately. And you're basically shooting the women in the foot before they've got a chance to show you that they can draw the same numbers.
And that's where the Federation gets itself in trouble. My gut feeling right now, and this is hard to say because the marketing has not been equal, but I think that comparison, yes, you're going to have more interest on a ratings perspective for a U.S.-Mexico men's friendly than a U.S.-Canada women's friendly. Just all things considered, if it's same time in the World Cup cycle, if it's not right before qualifier, whatever, if it's just a big friendly, I think the rating's going to be bigger on the men's side. Partially because you have a large Latino audience that is going to tune in the United States for Mexico that you don't have for that Canada game. So that's fine. That's justifiable. It's understandable. We can all understand that. But the basics of the equality across the board have to be the same. So the Federation cannot appear, and they definitely can't have the person who's overseeing their marketing say that the team has been undermarketed. And they cannot have the appearance of Federation marketing supporting the men's game against Mexico more than the women's game against Canada. That makes no sense. The audience is going to be there in a larger number for the men. I think that is the case. And until that changes, that's definitely something that is just there. It doesn't mean you can pay them less in the bonus that they would get for winning the game.
Yeah.
That's the part that, and that's what some people try to do. And that's not right. That's not fair to me. That's changing the argument in midstream. The bonus has to be the same. The other things have to be the same. If you can justify that, okay, the ratings are there over a 4-year cycle to show that the men draw more, and that means you're drawing more via advertising, and that means this. Okay, fine. In a straight up 4-year cycle, if they're getting the same percentage of whatever marketing deals are done and they make more because there are more marketing deals, okay, fine. I think everybody gets that. But that's not what everybody's arguing about now, because the problem is the rates are not the same.
No.
So that's the issue at the base of it now. It's not even to that level because the rates are not the same. That's what blows my mind. It's
a federation that's trying to go. They're trying to scapegoat it in other words, and I'm not even necessarily the federation right now because this is obviously just come up, and we'll see how they react and how this goes. But a lot of the discussion is trying to scapegoat one thing or another when the fact is, like you said, the rates are not the same. I mean, there's justification behind marketing and revenue, and I get that. I completely get that, but there have also been times where the women's revenue has been higher as well. So it's a breaking down of an argument where one side is it's two sides that don't want to agree on a statement, and it comes down honestly to people educating themselves on what is really happening, seeing the numbers, realizing that yes, the men's national team is going to draw more just because it's been marketed more efficiently.
Longer history.
The
market for men's professional sports is wider, and especially when you include Latin countries and different things into it, it's wider than the women's side. Okay, fine. The volume of these deals might be different because of that, but the rates are not the same to begin with. And then when you do have those years where it's a World Cup year and there is a victory tour afterwards and there is more revenue coming in and the women are still making less than the men made, I don't know how you can argue that.
You can, but it would be a blind argument. I mean,
I don't get it. Yeah.
I'm not saying that you should, but there are people that do argue that, and it's a blind argument because they're not looking at the facts.
Right.
And this seems to be a consistent trend where people don't want to look at the facts; they just want to make their statement and move on. And until we're allowed to, stand up and say, no, these are the facts, this is what's going on, and people listen and educate themselves on it, then it's just going to be this round robin of arguments that get absolutely nowhere.
Yeah, it's this thing, and I really hope that, because look, any type of case like this is going to be settled in the court of public opinion as much as it is in the legal realm, and I hope that the messaging around this, I understand the point like Carly Lloyd made. I understand that, and I get it. I don't know if it necessarily helps the public perception of this. It does rile people up both ways, and there's a deeper lying thing to me about it in terms of just general and utter fairness. And you cannot justify these differences in basic rates based off male, female, larger audience, smaller audience, or the flip side, or better, higher ranked team versus lower ranked team, more success, less success. Those things don't even come into where I'm at with this right now, is the rates for the same work. And this goes back to what they're filing it under. The rates for the same work in the same environment are not the same. Mm-hmm. And that cannot be justified from either side via any other argument. It has to be the same.
Correct. It has to be equal pay. Absolutely.
Give it the opportunity. I mean, if I'm a salesperson and you're a salesperson and we both make 20% commission, and you sell more, you make more money. I sell more, I make more money. Flat out.
Yeah.
And if you're going to have a situation, and this is something that the Federation, like it blows my mind in terms of some of these justifications. Okay, the women have played more friendlies. They don't play as many club games, so they have opportunities to play more friendlies. That means the federation has more opportunities to bring in more revenue.
Mm-hmm.
Just pay the same cut, and there's really not an argument about it.
Nope.
You know, if the women are drawing 50,000 more fans because they're playing 10 more games, whatever. It's $1.50 per ticket for the men. It's $1.20 per ticket for the women. Explain that one to me because I don't understand it.
It's the federation not wanting to give them it's using the team to make more money, but not giving them the same money back.
I mean, are the ticket prices different? Are you going to tell me that one? I don't think that's the case.
I have seen that the ticket prices for the women's national team is less money.
Okay, but then you're bringing in less money, and if the percentage is the same, then the women are going to make less money if the revenue is less on a per ticket. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, but that's not even the argument. We're not even to that point yet. We can't have that argument because the level's not the same.
But also in the same regard, though, that the tickets for the men's national team should also be looked at because they are way too high.
Oh yeah, no, that's
so like in that regard, there's a flip conversation there.
That's
way too high.
Yes, maybe you'll get more people in the building if you don't charge so much.
Correct. I mean that sort of pay structure has worked very well for Atlanta United. So there's an obvious a proof of that function and that idea working. But what just gets me is that we're having this conversation full out about ways that this can be done and it can be changed, but there's been no movement on the federation side to try and correct these errors. So it was done intentionally. So I think that's just a thing that irritates me, and I know that as a big issue on why the women decided to come forward with this and to finally stand the ground and put a lawsuit out, because this is dealing with not only the women from the 2015 World Cup run, but this is dealing with the future of women's soccer in general. And I think that's like what a lot of the women, what a lot of the players have been saying in their comments is that it was time to stand up now, and it's going to be difficult. It's going to be hard, and this is going to be a very long process. We don't assume this is going to get done in like a short period of time. We know this is going to be a long fight that we've got to stand into, but the fights we're fighting for. And it is a lot about this justification of standing up and saying that they deserve equal pay. And whether or not they get it is to be seen, but it should be a fight it's a fight worth fighting for.
100%. And the thing that I think some people want to still try to argue, and they want to say, okay, they don't deserve equal pay because of revenues coming in. I think that's crazy, because if you're tying it to revenue, fine, justify it and show that the rates are the same. They're not. So you can't make that argument. If you are paid, if it's all tied to revenue, whether it's ticket revenue, whether it's sponsorship revenue, whether it's TV revenue, whether it's merchandise revenue, all of it, and the men get paid the same rate for each situation as the women do, and the men draw more sponsorship or draw higher ratings, which equals more money, or draw more people into the building at a higher ticket price. Okay, you can have your argument that they got paid more and it was justified. Right now, you can't even have that argument, and that's the problem with all this. When you get into 4-year cycles where the women bring in more revenue but are paid less, there is no justification for that. It's not a year by year. And that's one thing that I feel like some of the reporting around it, zeroing in on 2015 for the women versus the men, is unfair, and it creates dissension, because you're talking about a World Cup year that included a victory tour versus a Gold Cup year that had nothing else going on in it on the men's side. It's not the same argument, but the 4-year cycle, as you said at the beginning, is what's important here. And when you show those, base it off revenue, base it off the same percentages, bonuses should be the same, everything should be the same. And if one team brings in more revenue than the other, yeah, those players are going to make more money because it's there. But right now, you're not even to that point.
No. And I agree with everything you said. I mean, we can have this argument for hours in this, but it's about looking at the 4-year cycle and looking at the numbers from all of that. But the justification for pay is not there. No, or it has not been proven yet on why there's justification for that pay. But and the reality, I don't think that there is going to be justification for it. So it will be interesting how this goes moving forward.
Very, very interesting ahead of a World Cup, and we will get deeper into the on-the-field issues, and hopefully this doesn't distract from the on-the-field issues, because the U.S. go into this, I don't think, is the favorite, and France is the favorite to me. I will openly admit that. Oh, for sure, France is. That team is playing exceptionally well together right now. The speed of that team is insane, and yeah. I mean, you're on home turf, and you're just coming off of a men's. Sorry, my dog just started barking. You're coming off of a men's, obviously World Cup year where France won. So there's going to be a lot of attention in France regarding this World Cup because they want their women to bring it home just as well. And yeah, 100% they're the favorites. And also, I mean, I know that this is probably not people's second go-to, but I think England's also got a lot going for them as well. I do too. And you've got Germany, and you've got a young Japan squad.
Yes.
Brazil's still lurking, although I think they're a cut below. It's a wide open tournament this year. It's going to be a lot of fun, and we're going to talk a lot about it and talk about the fun aspects of this. But this is an important issue, and I hope if you guys have questions, tweet at us. You know where we're at on Twitter. Let us know what you're thinking on it. Let us know if we were wrong. Let us check us on stuff, please. Like, this is something that needs to be talked about in the correct way. You're going to be on Soccer Down Here on Monday talking about Atlanta and Philadelphia, but I believe you and Jess are doing a Queens of the South episode next week. Plug that as well.
So we're supposed to be recording on Tuesday, so we'll basically be recapping also the end of CCL for us and also the Philly game that's at home on Sunday, and then going into this sort of international break with the call-ups that we've had, things like that, and sort of some of the interesting notes and interesting discussions that we can get into about how a certain player for Atlanta United has been called up to his national team but is not actually getting minutes for our team in general. Yeah, it will be a very interesting conversation, and you should definitely go and check it out. You can find us at basically all of the podcasting platforms under Unrelegated, because it's a sort of a sub episode under the whole umbrella of Unrelegated. So that's at UnrelATL on Twitter. You can find me at the Kelly Frances, and I'll be tweeting out all of the episodes and things like that as well. So if you just want to wait for that episode to drop, it will probably drop Wednesday morning after we record it Tuesday night.
Thanks to Jessica. Thanks to Kelly for chiming in on this week's Women's Soccer Weekly podcast. Make sure you're following Unreal ATL on all of your social media platforms and all of your podcatchers to get all their great content, including Jay Riddle, our good friend as well. If you guys have topics you'd like for us to dig into on the Women's Soccer Weekly podcast, please tweet at us at Soccer Down Here. Shoot us a message. Let us know what issues, what things you want to learn more about or know more about, or just hear us discuss and ramble on about. We greatly appreciate you guys listening. This is an important year for women's soccer in the United States. It's a World Cup year. You have this lawsuit that has to get handled by the Federation in the correct way. So much going on, and we will be talking about it all year long on Soccer Down Here and on the Women's Soccer Weekly podcast. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Have a good one.